Without further ado, I'm going to introduce the President of the IFA, Tim Cullen, who will open the proceedings.
Thanks, Damien. Good morning, everybody, and ladies and gentlemen, and good morning and welcome to IFA's Farm and Climate Summit. It's great to see such a strong attendance here today. It's testament to how engaged farmers are with climate action. Despite the narrative some choose to portray, Irish farmers are ready, willing and able to step up and play their part to help Ireland achieve its climate change ambitions. Already we have seen examples of this with the use of protected urea up almost 60% in 2022 compared to 21. Almost half of all slurry is now being spread using low emission techniques. This proves that farmers will step up when given the opportunity, along with appropriate support and advice. Farming has been given an emission ceiling for 2030 that is 25% lower than 2018. This is hugely challenging, but farmers are putting their shoulder to the wheel to help reduce emissions. We will not shirk our responsibility when it comes to climate action. However, let me be clear, we will not allow farming become the sacrificial lamb where cutting agricultural activity is seen as a fast-track solution to reducing overall national emissions. Listening to recent policy proposals at both national and European level, there is a clear agenda to reduce agriculture and food production in any way possible. The new Common Agricultural Policy and nitrates banning are already impacting on our sector. Further proposals relating to the Nitrates Action Programme, the Nature Restoration Law and the Industrial Emissions Directive, to name a few, all aim to further reduce production. Policies which led to a cut in food production at a time of massive food security concerns are foolish in the extreme. It will lead to an increase in overall emissions, with production moving to more carbon-intensive parts of the world. We need to focus on reducing emissions, not on reducing output. Recently, we saw that imports of food from Brazil into the European Union increased by 47% in 2022. The recent change of government in Brazil is likely to see political pressure at EU level to push on with the Mercosur trade deal. The Irish Climate Act requires the government to take account of carbon leakage, which is defined in the Act as the transfer due to climate policies of production to other countries with less restrictive policies with regard to greenhouse gas emissions. Last July, we wrote to the then Taoiseach asking him to outline, among other things, what assessment the government had made of the potential for carbon leakage arising from its climate plans. The Taoiseach replied, advising that he had passed the correspondence to Minister Eamon Ryan. To date, no reply whatsoever has been received from Minister Ryan. Our government has ignored the requirement in their own Climate Act to ensure that climate policies don't lead to production moving to countries with a more lax environmental policy. The consequences are already clear. Imports from Brazil are rocketing up to lead an increase in global emissions. We will work to reduce emissions, but not by reducing output and cutting our methane income, or cutting our members' incomes, just to see global emissions increasing. Economically, it will also have a massive financial impact, as Ciaran Fitzgerald will demonstrate in the next session. We also have little by way of financial commitment from this government in relation to agriculture and climate targets. Beef and sheep farming are low-income sectors that play a very important role in the rural economy. They will need financial support to meet the targets set down. The tillage sector is well placed to play a key role in reducing emissions, but proper incentives will have to be put in place. And our dairy sector is a huge success story. We cannot regulate it out of business. Minister Eamon Ryan has talked a lot about AD and solar as solutions that farmers can be part of. But like so many other aspects of the government's climate policy, people are asking, where is the funding? Some in government have pointed to CAP funding as an example of financial support for climate targets. However, What they fail to point out is that CAP funding to agriculture in real terms has fallen by around 20% over the last 15 years. The New Acres environmental scheme has also been heralded as a game-changing agri-environmental scheme. However, it is a poor relation to the REP scheme it attempted to replace. Funding for that scheme in real terms was about 19% higher at its peak. While the scheme is disappointing, most farmers have no option but to apply, as environmental schemes make up a huge proportion of their incomes. Now we have farmers who have applied for the new scheme and they're not even sure if they will be accepted or not. The Minister must address this today. Our first session will look at high-level issues, including the economic contribution of Irish agriculture, what consumers are looking for, and the policy changes coming from Europe. Our second session will look at the science behind climate issues and what the sector will be asked to do as part of the recently published Government Climate Action Plan. Following lunch, we will have a keynote address from the Minister for Agriculture, Charlie McConalogue, followed by a discussion on the future policy changes for Irish farmers and the wider agri-food industry. Sustainability is a term that every industry and sector now use on an almost daily basis. What is often overlooked is that sustainability has three pillars: economic, social and environmental. Blindly pursuing environmental sustainability, which many of our policymakers are now hell-bent on at the expense of economic and social sustainability, we will have potentially disastrous consequences to this country. That is why we felt it was important to have today's event and to put in context the opportunities and the risks we face at this pivotal time for Irish agriculture. I hope you find the day of benefit and that it helps to put perspective the challenges we now face. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, President. So we have two apologies I want to make, first of all. One is our South Leinster Vice President, Francie Gorman, can't be here. You may have heard that Francie had an accident over Christmas and broke his leg, unfortunately, so he's laid up for a few weeks, so he can't be here. And also, Brian Rush, our Deputy President, has had an issue on the farm, labour-wise, and he's unable to be here this morning at short notice. So Geraldine O'Sullivan is going to step in and moderate session one. So what we're about here for the first two sessions in particular is about, I suppose, information, facts, trying to establish exactly what's facing us, what the science behind that is, and what are the people who make the rules are saying to us as farmers. So I'm going to call on Geraldine O'Sullivan to come up and take over to moderate session one. Geraldine.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the home of Irish rugby. As a Limerick woman, that will be a controversial statement, but thank you very much. As Damien said, this is a very important session there this morning where we'll reflect on the economic value and the challenges ahead for the sector and very much set the scene for our discussions as we progress throughout the day. So I'd firstly like to introduce our panel that'll be joining us here today. Ciaran Fitzgerald is an agri-food economist with over 40 years' experience in the food and drink industry at European and national level. Ciaran has a master's degree from UCD, specialising in ag economics and international trade. He has worked with Teagasc in the rural economy section, with IBEC in food and drink, as well as IBEC's business sectors, and has served and was chairperson of the Meat Industry Ireland also. He served on the expert group of EU level on an advisory committee and also with expert groups at a national level. And Ciaran will be presenting to us after this introduction. Deirdre Ryan is Director of Sustainability and Quality Assurance with the Origin Green programme with Bord Bia. She is responsible for driving and implementing the Origin Green strategy and the ambition to safeguard Ireland's global reputation as a producer of quality, sustainable food. Verified Origin Green members account for 90% of our exports. So Deirdre has held positions with Lidl, Ornua, Nestle, Switzerland and Metro Group. And of course, she was an Olympian high jumper in the London Olympics. Liam MacHale is as we all know, is the IFA Director of Rural Affairs. He has held that position with IFA since 2014, and this plays a crucial role in promoting and defending Irish farmers' interests at European level. He has had a very varied career, and that accounts for his incredible ability to speak 6 languages. As someone that speaks one is some achievement. And he has held positions within Board BIA, within PepsiCo, CNC International, and with AIB. So I'd like now to introduce Ciaran, who will be talking to us about the economic value of Irish agriculture.
Thank you. Thanks, Amelia. Are we good to go? Hopefully we get the technology piece of this right. So look, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the IFA and Damien and Ty in particular for asking me to speak here. I think one of the prompters of that was I was amazed at the end of 2022 to look at CSO figures for agricultural output and see that we'd exceeded 12 billion. And while that was of interest in its own right, I think what was also of interest was the stark silence there was in the economic narrative about this particular figure. And it's that issue that I want to address here in terms of what the perception of ag in the economy is and what it should be and how that's driving some of the prejudice. I'm always conscious when you're making a speech in economics that it can be turgid and sound very boring, and I'm conscious that the great Lyndon Johnson, former president of the US, said to one of his economists that making a speech in economics is a bit like peeing in your pants, son. It may feel warm to you, but it doesn't look like that to anybody else. So I'll try and keep the technical economics to a minimum and try and make it accessible. So look, where we are, I think, in the context of like why does economics matter and why we're talking about it is, I think all of our challenges in terms of trying to interact with government and get them to discuss things with us and agree with us maybe and support us is we're trying to show our relevance. And there's a big challenge in showing the economic relevance of the ag sector in Ireland in 2022. And I think, but that is something that we have to strive for, because I think when you're relevant, you don't get given away, frankly. And if we look at relevance in the past, in 2010, when the Irish economy was on its knees, we had discussions with government about the abolition of milk quota, for instance, and there was lots of support because it was needed at the time. We now are having a different conversation in lots of ways. Not that the economic importance has gone away, it's been enhanced, but we're talking about a regulatory impact that can constrain the sector. And we want to be able to have that conversation on the basis that everybody understands what our relevance is, what the impact is, and we can have a fully informed conversation here. So that's, I suppose, the broad theme here. Economic relevance isn't just a number. It does, if you like, drive the conversations about what goes on in the economy, what's regulated and what's supported. So if I look at Irish economy relevance in 2022, with, as I said, the information, if you like, at the end of the year that, you know, agricultural output is over 12 billion, it's up almost 70% since 2010. I see an economic narrative, to be honest with you, that really doesn't include ag. We have a narrative that all the year was talking about was, corporation tax, and it's a great thing, and how important it was. And by the end of the year, there were huge concerns expressed about Ireland's foreign direct investment model, that we were losing jobs. There was a review announced of industrial policy. It was a quick enough review, but over that 2-month period, what was supposed to happen was a re-examination of industrial policy. That review concluded. And if you read it, as I have done, there isn't a single mention of agriculture or food in it. And I really do think that this is a big challenge here, and that while in lots of ways, and I'll cover it in the presentation, there's a recognition that, you know, the profits of multinationals are in our accounts. We know we don't get to spend the money, etc., etc. But when it comes to looking across our economy, we go back to those large figures. And we define things like agriculture with reference to those large figures, and we diminish its value. So, what have I done? I've turned everything off here. That's not a good idea. So, let's look at the backdrop to this in the last 3 or 4 years, because I think, as has been mentioned by the President, we're all aware that agriculture has been assailed in the last 3 years. There's no other way of describing it. And so that, you know, what was supposed to be or should be an informed conversation of the science of decarbonisation of an economy became something of an onslaught. And I would suggest that agriculture over that period was broadly characterised as a polluter. Agriculture's performance and the food industry's performance throughout COVID, for instance, was rarely commented on, because not only did we have the domestic challenges at home of keeping agriculture and food production going, we had the global challenges of selling into export markets where 1/3 of the demand was closed because restaurants and fast food channels were closed, and yet agriculture and food performed remarkably. But was there commentary on it? Was there recognition of it? And I think the answer to that is no. Unfortunately, this sort of combination of a prejudice, if you like, and a bit of economic loose thinking has created this sense that when we look at the challenges of reducing carbon emissions, there's a dismissal of agriculture's economic importance. And that, I think, has to be of huge concern. So numbers are used to be dismissive. And I think the other piece that we all know here is that, you know, again, as part of maybe magical thinking, there's been a promotion of the horticultural sector as a sort of a great panacea here. And like, that's fine at one level. But I think as Jim Power's study showed, you know, while we are all aware that food can be and is sold below cost, fruit and vegetable is chronically sold below cost. So the notion that, you know, in the first instance, that people in livestock production, dairy and meat production, have been misguided and never thought of anything else and never had an option, or were misled into getting into this type of farming by some form of you know, oppression, is absolute nonsense. But the notion of a quick and easy panacea into plant-based or the horticultural sector is not well grounded, and you know, is I think in contrast to the reality. It also speaks to a disconnect in the sense that one of the issues that affects food production is that by law the food producer cannot set the price of food, and that is by law. And I suppose I'd make that point in the context of people saying, you know, why don't you do more on the plant-based, or even still. A lot of the time when we talk to government departments about other sectors, they will admire a sector like the pharmaceutical industry and say, my God, look at their contribution to gross value added and look at their growth profile. And you say to them, well, yeah, the pharmaceutical industry sets its own prices. It can't have its products sold below cost. It doesn't have to produce an own label version of any new product that it can put together. So people at policy level really need to join up the dots. And I think that's an important consideration when we look at this eulogy around plant-based products. It can work for some people, but like, there are clearly scale and energy issues around it now. And certainly, as long as the end result is chronic below-cost selling, it's hard to see with that level of margin how there's a future in it. So if I take a step back and we look at our 12 billion euro and say, let's do an assessment of what that means, I think one of the first thing it means is that global demand for Ireland's food offering, its grass-based food offering, is increasing, is robust. And while, again, people in this room will know there are going to be huge challenges in maintaining this value, but it certainly does speak to the fact that there is a growing global demand for what we can produce. What it also says in terms of the Irish economy is that we have reached a situation where the Irish economy spend from purchasing meat and dairy products alone is about 10 billion euro. Now, what's important here is that our own CSO, our own Department of Enterprise and Trade, as well as Eurostat, do an exercise every year on, well, what is expenditure in the Irish economy like? And what comes from that is that the spend by the agri-food sector is 3 times greater in the Irish economy than any other business. And that is hugely important. I mean, I'll walk through some of the other issues around GDP, but what you really are need to be aware of is what drives economic activity in Ireland. It's not what drives global activity, it's what drives economic activity in Ireland. And that's where the agri-food sector is hugely important. And as I say, as measured by independent organisations like the CSO and the Department of Trade, the expenditure from ag and food is 3 times greater. Every billion in exports, I think the figure for this year will be, exports from Ireland will reach 16 billion. Spend in the Irish economy is about 16 billion, maybe slightly higher. So every billion, creates a billion of expenditure in the Irish economy. We don't have that from the FDI sector. The FDI sector, the foreign direct investment sector, exports 320 billion euros worth of product from Ireland, which is a great figure. It spends 31 billion in the Irish economy. That's the reality of what Ireland gets from the 320 billion. And we are all supposedly aware of that because we need to be aware of it. But we also need to be aware of, at the same time, what a sector like the agri-food sector is doing and what its impact actually is. The point of all that is to bring us, I think, to a concern when we look at some of the driving forces about the politics around emissions reduction, is that there hasn't been any real statement about whether this had an economic impact or not. And what I would suggest is it needs to be factored into any discussion that every 1% now in our output reduction represents a reduction of 120 million in output and a reduction of 240 million in Irish economy spend. That's not small money. When you get into things like a possible 5%, that's over €1 billion. Those figures haven't been even looked at. And I think that has to be a concern, and it's something that has to be addressed. Look, again, this is the sort of the GDP piece, but what we know from the GDP piece is that the global profits of Google, Apple, Amazon and others are included in the Irish economy figure, but the 10 billion paid by processors for meat and dairy products is not included in the Irish economy GDP figure. Now, that is not a very good way of looking at what's important in your economy. And clearly, the intent in raising these issues is about balance. I'm not, going to dismiss foreign direct investment. It doesn't make sense to do that. Foreign direct investment is a huge part of the Irish economy. It's not the only part. That is the key. Balance is required here. And if you want to get verification of ag in terms of this economic multiplier, I would suggest that you have a look at the KPMG IFA study, which looked at the impact of rural towns and showed huge contribution in terms of spend in the Irish economy and jobs, 41,000 jobs, I think, in the KPMG study. Ciaran, Glanbia of old that used to be, did a similar exercise with Ernst & Young, and what that study shows is that they have an economic impact of 3.4 billion and are supporting 17,500 jobs. The CSO multiplier, if anybody wants to go and have a look at it, they produce analysis every year which show that the impact is 2. So for every euro created in ag output, and ag and food output, there's €2 spent in the economy. So what's the challenge here? I mean, it might seem obvious, but I do think it's worth phrasing. The economic misrepresentation of ag has been used to promote the notion that the contribution currently of the sector is low and that it's easily replaced. And if you look at these crazy numbers, the CSO figure for 2022 shows that the ag contribution, while it's 12 billion in turnover, its contribution to what's called gross value added is 5. Now, every year, supposedly, growth in the multinational turnover adds about 15 billion in the Irish economy. So if you're trying to replace 5 and you have a notion that you're getting 15 billion without really trying very hard, it's not hard to see how you can be dismissive of agriculture's impact, even though that's nonsense and that those figures are fictional. And I suppose that speaks again to the concern we all have as articulated by the President. Is the reduction in emissions intent to reduce carbon, or is it to reduce cows? And that is questionable at times, both because of the the bias and prejudice we know against the livestock production system, but it's also, I think, questionable when we look at the perception of the economics of this. So my, I suppose, assessment of all of this is that what is our challenge here is to challenge this prejudice around the economic ignorance about the sector. I think it's also a big challenge, and it's a challenge for the people in this room in lots of ways, to change how agriculture speaks about itself. Because if I look at some of the sectors I would have been involved with over the years in IBEC, pharmaceuticals and ICT, they all speak positively about what they do, why they want to do it, and why they want to stay at it. I think it is a big challenge for ag. I get the issue around, things like price and income volatility have not gone away, and they are always a challenge. And ag is a low margin business, not least because the government wants it to be a low margin business because it says you can't set food prices. But really, there needs to be another message, I would suggest, that says we are big and important, we have an economic impact, we have a future economic impact. What we need is your help to try and maximize that economic impact. Our economic impact is unique. And I suppose what that hopefully will lead to is a better acceptance that the intent with emissions reduction is based on the notion that, we understand the economics of this, and we're not in the business of trying to get rid of cows, we're in the business of trying to decarbonise our economy. Look, I'm conscious that in the rest of this presentation I'll have given a lot of information and people can access that, but I suppose the core of what I'm talking about here in some of these slides is that, in essence, the Minister for Finance in Ireland knows that when he or she sits down every year to frame a budget, he's talking about a 200 billion euro economy, not a 420 billion euro economy. Because if he spent, or she spent, like it was 420 billion, we'd all go bust very quickly. So we know this, but what we don't seem to recognise is that when it comes to the description of a sector and how economically important it is, we reinstate the 420 billion. We take a figure of 5 billion in ag rather than 12 billion, and we say, well, ag is only 5 billion divided by 420, 1%, would it be missed? That is one of the core ignorances that we have to challenge, as I've said. And it's not inaccessible. It's not a question of reinventing economic analysis. I mean, GDP is a protocol. It's not E is equal to MC squared. It's not a science. And there's plenty of weaknesses in that protocol anyway. But it was certainly not a protocol designed to deal with globalization. And it is well known that we have a significant amount of economic activity that has no economic footprint in Ireland. And when it comes then to trying to grow the Irish economy and maintain the Irish economy, we really need to know what does have an economic footprint in Ireland and to support that. And as I said before, this is about balance. It's also, I would suggest, about buy-in too, because again, one of the things I would suggest that government is attempting to do in decarbonising the Irish economy is to get buy-in from practitioners and consumers. And, again, one of the ironies of where we sit is agriculture is far more ready and organised and structured to deal with decarbonisation than any other sector of the Irish economy. And yet all we hear is the issue of, the sort of political stuff around, well, it's about cows, it's not carbon. My point is, if government want to get buy-in, they really need to deal with the sector on a factual basis, not based on ideology or magical thinking, to get buy-in. And that's hugely important. So as well as the economic piece, we need to start to talk realistically about the contribution we're getting. I mean, if we look at the global picture for food, what we're constantly being told is that when the World Food Organization looks 10 years out, what it sees is increasing demand for dairy and meat products, 1.2 to 2% a year, so 20% over the next 10 years. And what it is saying is that that product is now going to be produced in unregulated countries. In the case of dairy products, it's Pakistan and India. In the case of beef products, it's Brazil. And, you know, so there has to be a recognition of it, and the President has mentioned it is in the legislation. The other point I'd make, and I cover it in a slide, and as I said, I can go on to maybe some of this, just wanted to talk about this before. These are, I suppose, other verifications of how nonsensical the GDP figure is, but I don't want to bore you with more economic stuff than you actually need. But I suppose I'd say that we have been here before. In 2004, there was a review of Irish economy industrial policy. It's called Ahead of the Curve. It became nicknamed Around the Bend because it was so unrealistic. And what it did was, first and foremost, it said, agriculture is a sunset industry. We in Ireland are in a modern economy. We don't need it. We should leave agricultural production to Brazil. God help us. That was the, if you like, the ideology of suppression of 2004, because it wasn't just a statement. What we found is in the next 3 years with the Doha World Trade Round, Ireland Inc. did not put up a fight around the European concession of 350,000 tonnes of Brazilian beef to come into the EU and undermine the market. Fortunately, the Doha round fell apart and nothing happened. And fortunately, this enabled agriculture to step in when the Irish economy was in recession for the years 2008 to 2012 and play a significant role. So again, what I'm saying is here, the ideology may have changed. It's not global capitalism that's driving, if you like, loose talk around the economic impact of the sector. But the intent is still there, and it's still based on loose talk. And finally, I would say that, you know, the economic piece is a huge piece. It is very accessible. Lots of government departments are involved in the collation of figures that show what multiplier impacts are and what economic impact is. And really, what I think this sector requires is first and foremost a recognition that its economic impact is significant, a recognition that the intent is decarbonisation of the economy, and that some of the bias and prejudice against livestock production needs to be put where that sort of thing should be put, away in a press somewhere. And that if we're serious about decarbonisation and the buy-in, we need to honestly look at the real economic impact of the sector and honestly look at the fact that global demand for what Ireland's grass-based offering is actually increasing, despite what has been said by some of the detractors. So look, I think you've had enough economics for the morning, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Ciaran, thank you very much for your presentation, and I think it's very much what people here are looking for is that honest and truthful engagement and conversation in relation to the decarbonisation. And I think, again, it's what everyone knows here. You know, we all know the multiplier effect within our local communities, and it's great to have a figure here on it, and that it's 3 times the spend within the local communities from agriculture. So look, that presentation will be emailed to everyone here that's registered, so there will be a copy of that available. Now, as always in these things, we're going to be short on time, so I'm going to start the panel discussion now, and then I'll open it up, and there will be time for questions, obviously. So, Deirdre, I might start with you. We've seen here from Ciaran's presentation the undervalue, how we're undervaluing and not showing the true value and contribution of agriculture to the Irish economy. Your work with Board BA is about selling the Irish story of farmers and selling it to an international consumer. So I have kind of a 2-part question, I suppose, on this is, 1, what's the perception within our international customers of Irish food? And then also going back on what Ciaran was saying in relation to that narrative and explaining and changing that narrative as the sector being portrayed as a polluter or not taking its responsibility in relation to climate change, and how do we get an understanding of what's being done in Ireland as well as internationally?
Thanks, Geraldine, and thanks for a very interesting presentation, Ciaran. So delighted to join you here today. And I suppose, in relation to your first part of your question, in terms of what we do internationally. As you said in the introduction, we export 90% of what we produce based on, you know, our high quality and sustainably produced food. So a huge focus of what Board Bia does is in the international markets, and the perception and the story we tell varies differently in different markets, which we can of course go into. But I suppose the perception really of Irish farming, Irish food and drink exports in international markets is extremely positive. When we speak to our global buyers, about 81%, we have a pulse survey of buyers globally, say that, you know, they recognise Ireland as a source of sustainably produced food and drink. So we, you know, are amplifying that message as much as we can, and trade missions, trade buyer visits coming into the country, going out seeing for themselves what's happening on farm here in Ireland. But to your, I suppose, second point around the narrative here in Ireland, and, you know, indeed it is, it's become a very polarised debate in recent years, and there has been a lot of negativity around the conversation. And, you know, I understand how that can be very frustrating, but, you know, I do think that, you know, now that, you know, we have, as the President said, we do have, you know, good proof and progress and actionable, you know, plans that we can take. I think the focus can really be and can change, and the narrative can change, you know, quickly again, to focus on proof, the progress that we can share. I think also importantly the economic discussion that Ciaran spoke about. We are announcing and performance of prospects, so the economic value of the exports in 2 days' time, so I might be able to pre-share some of that. So, you know, I think now if we can focus on the proof, the progress, and sharing stories, and I think the connection to provenance of food that has become lost in recent years, and that's something that Board Bia wants to amplify. And there's, you know, a lot of stakeholders involved in changing that conversation, be it meat and dairy facts, you know, getting in around schools as well. And I think another kind of missing piece of the pie that hasn't been mentioned yet is the nutritional value, you know, and not only sustainable production, but sustainable consumption, and, you know, the balance and the nutritional density and value of food that we bring. So,
and just as Board Bia's kind of gauged the Irish consumer, and that it has a value on that, has that been gauged, is that understood, what we're doing here, what farmers are doing, the changes that have been made in recent times?
Yeah, certainly, and we do have, you know, obviously with our campaigns, we would focus very much around, you know, the power of your choices now, and trying to drive the message around buying, you know, the quality assured produce, and pulse surveys across all retailers around, you know, what they're willing to spend on. And, you know, there is a very high recognition of the quality assurance, but there's also is a growing recognition, you know, that still beef and dairy and those produce are still, you know, taste is always king, but environmental and social, you know, aspects of sustainability are very much front of mind despite inflationary pressures.
Thank you. Liam, I might come to you now. As we all know, a lot of the policies and indeed the challenges that we're facing come from Europe. So what's your sense of the European institutions? You know, what role do they place on primary producers? You know, what value do they have as part of these discussions? And then also, what are the various challenges and also the supports that will be coming in the medium term to support farmers as we face this transition?
Great. Good morning, and thank you very much, Geraldine. It's clear that food production has been taken for granted. The CAP is the largest part of the European budget, but that's been viewed as a negative. Primary producers, I would say, the blame has been put on the agriculture sector for the environmental damage. If we look at what the challenges are, the environmental lobby has become much stronger, and social media has fed into that, giving a larger platform to opposing voices. And as we know, there is a lot of misinformation out there. There are a lot of short-term challenges that we face, whether it's supply chain, COVID, war, inflation, energy crisis. And then you've got the underlying long-term challenges of climate change and the environment. It's clear that the CAP does not have sufficient funding for all of this. And if we look at the challenging policy for us, it's the coherence across the different pieces. And I'll go through later maybe all of the different elements that are involved. But within the Commission, we believe that the departments are not speaking to each other. And as a result, there are parts of the legislation that actually do damage to our sector. On the other side, what are the supports? Well, the political support is beginning to grow. You might have seen the 4th of January, the document on drivers of food security. And the fact that there is a document now and a discussion around food security, which we had always pushed for in reform of the CAP, but had been ignored. Now the political leaders are addressing it. Now, it came out last week, which is a quiet week in Brussels. I'm not sure, is that because there were a lot of things in there that they know will be challenging to address and which would be in our favour. But certainly it's a great platform going forward. There were emergency measures brought in over the last 12 months. We know the crisis reserve was activated, state aid, a temporary framework that was revised twice, and there's been additional member state funding. And there has been a recognition of food production within the CAP, the GAIACs. There were derogations given to increase food production, where previously there was a demand for 4% of EFAs for that land to be taken out. There is an increased focus on research and innovation, Horizon Europe. That amount has been doubled. And in this regard, Ireland is held very highly. I was at the Grassland Conference in northern France during the summer, and out of the 150 papers that were there were almost 20 of those came from Teagasc on that high-level research. So we are to the forefront, and it's very important that we use this whole knowledge because that will be what is needed for this transition and to address the challenges that we face going forward. And finally, I would say as regards supports, there are impact assessments now being carried out on the legislation. We know in the Farm to Fork strategy, however, that was absent, and that's why we're challenging it. But there is a better regulation. They are looking to address stakeholders and listen to different points of view to try and get the legislation right and better. But we know that under the Green Deal, there is so much legislation out there that they don't always get it right.
Thank you. Deirdre, I might just go back to you quickly. Much of our growth and opportunities in export markets are Asia and African markets, new markets. Do they place the same value on mitigation, climate change mitigation and sustainability as we do here? And what are they looking for? Like, what demands will we see as in the coming years trying to enter into these markets? And also, what supports have Board Via to help farmers to adopt to this?
Loads of questions.
Yeah.
I guess firstly, we export to about 180 countries, so it's really important to have a diverse range of markets for us to find the best, most suitable and most valuable markets for our products. So within that, about a third still goes to the UK, a third would go to the rest of, to Europe, and a third would go to those international markets you mentioned. And we talk about sustainability and quality in all of those markets, and I suppose to the President's point earlier, there's 3 pillars to sustainability, and different aspects of sustainability resonate with different markets. So in the Middle East, it's more about health and nutrition and the nutrient density and the importance of the quality of the nutritional quality of our food, community, things like that. Whereas in countries like, for example, Scandinavia, they understand that carbon footprint is of huge interest, and that's what we talk about when we're speaking about sustainability in those markets. Germany, be it a very price-sensitive market, is also very interested in environmental footprint. In Asia, the consumer understands more about quality assurance and food safety. And I suppose the naturalness, so grass-fed is a message that we would very much utilise in the Asian market. And it's certainly a growing market. It's about 9% this year, so it is absolutely an area that we do focus on, but I suppose we tailor the message to the market. But having said that, we have huge Japanese customers who have purchased big Irish contracts based on sustainability credentials as well, and that's the customer, the global customer rather than the consumer understanding. So yeah, we look varied markets, varied messages around sustainability that resonate and that are important. So that's always keeping, keeping kind of to the forefront within that. I suppose the second part of the question was what I suppose our activities are
and how we can support so as we're trying to meet those, as you said, varied. So depending on markets, so there's multiple things that are being asked from farmers. How do we help and support the people here to meet those multiple requirements?
Yeah, and look, it is hugely challenging, and we do a lot of research. You've probably answered loads of surveys from us as well around what are some of the challenges and how we can support more. And we are collaborating a lot with Teagasc and ICBF around a sustainability digital platform that will support and give additional tools. We have new e-learning that I'd like to plug around sustainability, so very bite-sized 15-minute e-learning modules around sustainability through our newsletter and so on as well. But I think one of the really big pieces that we'll be working on is around just knowing your footprint through your farmer feedback report. But obviously looking, and Lawrence will probably talk about it later, is the importance of that data and knowing what those easy actions are to take. What are the 10 things and action plans that you can take in your farm? So that's certainly going to be a huge focus area for us to, I suppose, not only be talking to the market around sustainability, but ensuring that we can support more around those tools that should be available.
Okay, we're short on time, so I'd like to just give a chance for the audience here. If there's anybody that has a question, Sean there and Pat. So there's roving mics going around. There's Sean is there.
Hello.
Three together. Is there? Yeah, Sean, you continue.
Okay. Thanks, Sean Lavery, Limerick County Chairman. First off, I'd like to welcome everyone here to County Limerick, to Thomond Park, but just to keep the time moving. This is a question for Ciaran Fitzgerald. Listening to your presentation there, I do wonder, like in your former role in IBEC, does Irish primary processing industry and the food industry in general spend enough money on supporting the message that we're trying to get across there? Because if you look at it in the Limerick County Executive during the year, we had a presentation from AgriAware where they went through the minuscule amount of money that's directed at selling Irish agriculture and selling the good message in a big way compared to the amount of money that the environmental sector and the anti-agri lobby are directing at it. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I would say that one of the challenges of being, if you like, in an IBEC or in a business representation situation has been the general ignorance first that you're met with. That despite everybody supposedly knowing that we need balance in the economy, that when we were in 2008 far too dependent on the financial sector and the development sector, and that all blew up, agriculture was there to save the day. The lazy economic thinking is systemic, unfortunately. And it's very difficult when there's an annual jamboree around the announcements of a GDP figure that says we're the second wealthiest country in the world, and nobody wants to be a naysayer and say that's not true. It's tougher. So it's not, I don't think, a question of resources. It's a question of being rigorous about the messaging. And it is a question, too, of that whole positive piece that I think has to come from farmers as well as the industry that says we're very good at what we do. We are internationally. The reason why our output is growing is we export 90% of it, so global demand for it is increasing. And we have a huge footprint in the Irish economy. And Irish economy footprint is what it's all about. Clearly more can be done, but that is the core message. And those are the prejudices, if you like, that you have to get through.
Question over here,
Thanks very much. Pat Murphy is my name. I'm a dairy and suckler farmer from Galway. Animals have been eating plants on Earth since life began, and total numbers are in around the same. Okay, the species might have changed. But there's talks of a 53% cut to the suckler herd alone. From an economic point of view, that's going to decimate rural communities. The question I have for Bord Bia is how is that going to affect our ability to sell on the international markets when Bord Bia use, we say, the suckler brand as in all its literature and its pictures? And I suppose a wider question then to the panel, why is Ireland now being targeted for a reduction? I suppose in spite of man's intervention, we say, in industry and aviation, just to give two examples. And is it right that the EU continue to import more and more beef with every trade agreement from the likes of Brazil? And how can these imports arrive into Europe with a zero carbon footprint? Thank you.
You go first.
Yeah,
Deirdre,
I'll go
after.
first then. Yeah. And indeed, yeah, and I guess, you know, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier in relation to, you know, what the work we're doing in the respective markets. It's all around trying to grow the value and the premiumisation of Irish produce. So be that via our trade missions, via our, you know, in-store campaigns, digital communications, and building those relationships with international buyers to try and, you know, grow the value of Irish exports, find the right markets and find the right customers for them, and, you know, increasingly working on the messaging and the narrative around Irish food and drink. And I think just, you know, this is, while it's, you know, you can feel the frustration around this in the Irish context, and I guess we're not alone in Europe. There are other countries. So when we speak to customers globally, they're very conscious as well of the Netherlands completely, you know, and the cutting of their herds, and still looking to Ireland for diversification. So, look, I think, you know, there are huge opportunities for Irish food and drink. There are excellent results from 2022. 2/3 of our exports are meat and dairy, and have grown in value and in volume in the last year. So, look, I think that's, you know, prospects are optimistic in that regard. In relation, I suppose, to you know, the trade with you know, with Brazil, and there are, I suppose, certain elements. I mean, I wonder who the first retailer will be to buy Brazilian beef, and I don't think they'll be fast coming if you know, if we know those Irish customers. There are probably certain elements of legislation coming in around due diligence and supply chains from deforestation, that might support in that regard as well, and also affect other elements of supply chains. So, look, I know it's certainly a challenge, but I don't think and hope that we won't see any Brazilian beef on shelves in any time soon in Ireland.
Deirdre, I might just answer it, because I suppose Pat's question, what's the risk? Because, you know, he's talking about the potential decrease in production. So that product that we're out selling in the markets, you know, will that product be there? So we're out, there's a demand, there's an interest, you know, as you said, for that diversification, that quality. Has there been any assessment to look at, you know, obviously it's a risk for Bord Bia, it's a risk for us that if there's a significant reduction, have we looked at that? Have we looked at that impact? Is that something that Bord Bia has considered? Because it's, you know, everyone here in this room is concerned about that risk, and I suppose if we're trying to grow export markets in one sense, we need to be aware and understand, and maybe that's part of that narrative and that dialogue and understanding.
Yeah, no, and look, certainly, you know, and I think everyone in agriculture is concerned about, you know, the growth of the industry and how we look at that. And I guess the focus really is around how do we premiumise, how do we find better value for those customers, and how do we build those key relationships. So,
Liam, I might get you to come in, or do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just think that the core issue here is that governments don't give away what they value, and whether that's the EU or a national government, and whether it's a Doha round of trade based on, you know, a ridiculous, I suppose, facile notion of globalization that says, well, all our food should be produced in Brazil or New Zealand, God help us. The core piece is that if government properly values the economic contribution. And you might say, well, that's what an economist would say. But I honestly do believe that has to be the first hurdle. Because what do you think you're giving away here? If you think you're giving away something that, for instance, is characterised as only being of environmental impact, or is only a small part of Ireland's GDP, or a minimal part of GDP, that's the first hurdle towards giving away. There is another piece to it that Liam, I think, can vouch to. You know, we are in a European Union that has been heavy on regulation and intervention at food production and food processing side, and then has said, now look after yourselves when you go to the marketplace because you're on your own. We don't interfere with the retailer. The retailer is a clearinghouse for all this. That, I think, message has to change. That structure has to change. And it's not undoable. You know, as I mentioned earlier, pharmaceutical drugs are sold at the price dictated by the manufacturer. It's not the end of the world or the end of capitalism. Mobile phones are sold that way. Energy is sold that way. And I do think we need a serious look at the food chain and the way that pricing is structured and the returns in the chain that are based on sustainable economics and not some wishful thinking when it comes to how food is priced.
You know, I might quickly, now we're over time as always, and I want to get in a few more questions. Maybe on the carbon focus, I suppose, how, as part of that as well, Liam, it might be an opportunity to bring it in.
And maybe just to follow up on Ciaran's point, the Commission are beginning to look outside of primary production. You'll hear the word food systems, and this is realising that retailers and other parts of the chain, whether it's processors, do play a part, and that the economic sustainability of farmers is essential because the environmental piece can't be addressed without farmers on the ground. If we look under the Green Deal, and Pat asked about why agriculture is being targeted. As I say, now they're looking a little bit broader, which is good. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, that is coming from DG Klima, that's the department responsible for climate action in Brussels. And this is trying to level the playing field. So if there is a product coming into the country, into the EU, that is being produced to standards below EU standards in relation to carbon emissions, then there's an extra cost. Now, agriculture and food products are excluded from that. The impact on farmers, however, is that fertilizers, steel, cement, and iron are included under the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So that will bring additional costs that you will face. And if we look on trade deals are becoming a lot more complex. And if we look at, say, product that is produced in South America in the Mercosur deal, we've always pushed the fact that, well, on traceability, they've got a much lower cost of production because they don't observe the same standards that are enforced here. And the cumulative impact of these trade deals means that there is additional volume coming into the EU market. In Parliament, there was the deforestation legislation that has been discussed, and this is to ensure that there is no product coming from land that was previously deforested, so no beef production. Now, that is a positive, obviously, for us, but this is a way to try and address Parliament's concerns, because it is Parliament that are holding up the sign-off, the political agreement on Mercosur. So if you put together the election of Lula in Brazil with the efforts of the Commission to try and reassure Parliament that there are no products coming from land that is deforested, so on the environmental side, it may pave the way for political support for a deal. And if you listen to what President von der Leyen is saying, she says we need to look at allies around the world. And that's driven by what we're seeing in Russia, Ukraine, and the political instabilities. So there are a lot of moving parts, but on the trade deals, it may work out, negatively for us. And, we've got to continue to put pressure, as we have done for the last 10, 20 years, particularly on Mercosur.
We're out. I'm going to take two questions here, one here and one over there. Yeah, Sean, sorry, yeah. And that I'm sorry, now the panelists will be around, but other than that, poor Mary Delaney is going to be in awful trouble in the next session. So, Tom first.
Ciaran, Tom Byrne, Wicklow County Executive. The blame game, Ciaran. How have we as farmers let ourselves become irrelevant and known as the sunset industry? Are we to blame? Is the plethora of farm organisations in Ireland to blame? Is Europe to blame? Have we become too successful at producing cheap food and people just don't care about it? So where do we go to reassert ourselves, or do we just need another Putin to show how valuable food is? Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose the answer is all of the above, but I think that's a pithy answer. I think, you know, what I would suggest is that nobody represents your industry like you do yourselves. And I think it's a challenge, but I think it's important that farmers talk about farming and farm organisations talk about agriculture on the basis that we are good at what we do, we're very professional at what we do, we are committed to our environmental impact, and we want to be here into the future. And that's part of the challenge. It's not the only one. I think the lazy thinking and the lazy economic thinking is part of the Irish political process. And that is a bugbear, because it's much simpler and it seems much easier if you're talking about industrial development to say, I have an endless pipeline of foreign direct investment here, don't have to really try, and then I've got these people over here shouting and roaring at me because they want help and assistance. So it's a combination, but I think the positive affirmation from the ag sector is a core part of it too.
Okay, final question.
Is me, I think, and it's more of a comment than a question. And before Ciaran's last contribution, he had before that twice mentioned attitude and in terms of agriculture product and farmers and farm leaders' attitude and talking up your product. And it reminded me, I was lucky enough to be on holidays in rural Portugal this year, and what struck both myself and my wife was the attitude of the public and everyone we dealt with to the product they were producing. They talked up their wine, their region, the pork we ate. They talked about the product which just came up the road. They were constantly talking up the product. And it struck us. We've travelled quite a bit, and they were so proud of their product. And I think it's something that we're missing here, not alone the public. We always blame the public, and in terms of the environment, it even happens among farmers. I'm a dairy farmer, and so I'll speak from that point of view. We have products in the dairy portfolio, Kerrygold Irish butter and Bailey's Irish cream. Many industries would give their left hand for products like that. And we have an industry here that has been talked down by environmentalists, but worse still, we get cuts being taken at dairy farming from within Irish agriculture. And I think Ciaran Fitzgerald's words should not be taken lightly. He has a pedigree here in Irish business down the years, and he has twice and now 3 times referred to farmers promoting farming and agriculture. And I think there's a lesson in that, and we should listen to it. Thank you.
Look, thank you all very much for the questions, and I think it's a very positive note to finish the session. I'd like you all to get together to thank our speaker presenter, Ciaran, Deirdre and Liam, please. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much to the speakers, and thanks to Geraldine as well, our